everybody. I'm Doctor of Philosophical Sciences, Professor of the Chair of the Uzbek Language and Literature, Russian and English languages of the Bukhara State Medical Institute, named after Abu Ali ibn Sina. Today, dear students, I'd like to deliver a report concerning historical points and historical events dealt with history of Central Asia. Namely, the topic will be called Eastern Peripatethics of Central Asia, that is 9th-12th century, and the Renaissance Europe, I mean the European Renaissance of 15th and 16th centuries. So, what is meant by the lecture, or let us say by the report? The main idea is to find out and try to find a kind of compromise historical between Eastern and Western points of view on historical data. So let's start. The next. Well, as a general information, it should be said that the world at any stage should be viewed not in isolation, but in its unity and integrity, in connections and common movements, I mean historical movements, in universal movement with the inherent contradictions and opposing forces, in connections and communications between parts and stages of the development of the world civilization. The problems of continuity in time and space, which is of paramount importance. From this point of view, we see the line of continuity of the Muslim Renaissance going from the East to the Renaissance of the West, and in particular the English Renaissance. I mean the 16th and beginning of the 17th centuries, called Late English Renaissance period. The historical interdependence of traditions unambiguously testifies to the conditioning of the English Renaissance by the Middle Ages and especially by the Muslim Renaissance, that is the 10th and 12th centuries. This period is called at the first Eastern Renaissance of Central Asia. The next. Well, to start with, it should be stated that it also unequivocally proves that the dependence of the English philosophy of the Renaissance on the general laws and the trends of this era is accepted. The conditionality of the Renaissance is recognized by the Middle Ages and especially the period of antiquity, I mean Greece antiquity. Then it is necessary to agree with the following general conclusion. What kind of conclusion? The conclusion is that the works of the Arab-speaking philosophers of the Middle Ages became one of the main sources, first of all, by which directly, maybe indirectly, all the outstanding Renaissance philosophers of Europe of that period, I mean 15th, 17th centuries, including the English, studied these signs. The next. Here you read the miniature of Eastern philosophers, a philosopher with his pupils, thus moment of discussion. The next, please. So, the study of the treatises of Arab philosophers, here, mind please one thing, when we say Arab philosophers, we don't mean that these philosophers were from Arab countries, nothing of the kind. Those were our ancestors, great philosophers, great enlighteners of Central Asia and the Bukhara, Samarkand region in particular. So far, mind please, when we say about, according to the sources, Arab philosophers, we mean Arab-speaking philosophers of Central Asia. So, the study of the treatises of Arab philosophers by Europeans was an obligatory stage in their mastery of the foundations of philosophical knowledge, as evinced by the fact already in the 9th and 13th centuries in the libraries of the English Oxford and Cambridge universities, there were available fundamental works and treatises of compatriots like Abu Nasr Farabi and Abu Ali ibn Sina, mostly known in Europe as Avicenna. This was also facilitated by the School of Jewish Translators of Spain. Pay attention, translators that formed in Spain in the 7th, starting from the 7th up to the 11th centuries, which do not open the world of ancient philosophy to Europe, but made it the property of the scientific thought and works of many scientists, that is, philosophers of Maveranach, like Muhammad Musa Khawarizmi, Abu Nasr al-Farabi, Ahmad Fergani, Abu Rayhan Biruni, Abu Ali ibn Sina, and many, many others. In European states, about 1,000 translators worked on the translations of the works of these above-mentioned scientists, before whom the problem of translating works from Greek, Syrian, Sanskrit, classical Farsi, and Arabic languages, and familiarizing with them, thereby the scientific community was highlighted. Among the scholars who served in the Caliphate and translated into Arabic from the Greek, Syrian, Farsi, and Hindi were Hunayn ibn Ishaq, 9th century, Ishaq ibn Hunayn, Hubaysh Habib ibn Qura, Yahya ibn Adi, Ishaq ad-Dimishki, the Masawakh family, the whole family, Nawbacht, Ibn Mukaffa, Ibn Manka, Ibn Bakshia, and others. Referring to the cultural ties between the Arab East and Western Europe, well-known scientists and specialists in the sphere of European history, Condorcet, Professor Condorcet, a French thinker of the 18th century, notes, the citation is, the works of the Arabs would have perished for the human race if they had not served to prepare a more lasting revival, the picture of which the West will present to us, and that the Arabs, they just Arab-speaking thinkers, spread in the West the embryos of humanism, which would have given fruit in later, heavier times. These fruits of Muslim culture, philosophy, humanism, were prepared by such centers of Hellenic culture, which were subordinate to the Caliphate, such as Alexandria, Ephesus, Nasibin, Seleucia, Antiochia, Gundishapur, Bactria. The achievements of philosophical thought of the Muslim East also became the property of the West. They were perceived, developed further, and raised to a new, much higher level of knowledge. In this case, a significant role was played by the Chartres and Paris universities of France, educational centers of cities of Bologna, Pavia, Genoa of Italy, and especially the University of Oxford and its outstanding representative, the Franciscan Everest Professor Roger Bacon. He lived in the 13th century, who put Al-Kindi on a par with Ptolemy teaching, highly respected the teachings of Avicenna, whose philosophical works were his death books. It is known, and this is the historical fact, that the works of Ibn Sina had such an impact on Professor Roger Bacon that he expressed his impressions, I mean the scientific impressions of his Avicenna's knowledge, with a number of letters addressed to Abu Ali ibn Sina, who died some 2-3 centuries before his living. So Ibn Sina is the inheritance of the 10th century, and Professor Roger Bacon lived in the 13th century. Nevertheless, Avicenna's works inspired him in such a way that he almost each night wrote letters to him, spiritually. The next, please. Here you see the panorama of European well-known scientists discussing the up-to-the-level problems of their time, surely. The next, please. The works of scholars for the Muslim East had a fruitful influence on the creativity and worldview of such brightest representatives of European philosophical thought as Siger from Brabant, Adeliard from Bath, John of Salisbury, Clairemont, Amalric from Bern. First of all, this influence came from the great three philosophers, Farabi, Ibn Sina, and Ibn Rushd, more known in Europe as Averroes. This study was carried out everywhere, in schools, churches, by the way, and universities, of course. For the intelligentsia of the advanced European countries of the 9th and 14th centuries, and later on with the epoch of Renaissance, it was considered mandatory to know the Arabic language, at least a general acquaintance with the culture, with literature, science, and technology of the East. The next, please. Is it okay? Well, it's okay. So, the functioning of universities, especially their medical faculties, without knowledge of Arab-speaking science and the Arabic language, I mean in Europe, especially in France and in Britain, Oxford and Cambridge universities, first of all. For pessimism, let us cite the complaints of the 9th century Bishop Alvaro of Cordoba, Spain, against his fellow believers, which he outlined in Latin in the work known as Indeculus Luminosus, to learn how to express himself in Arabic with great accuracy and grace. That was a complaint. So, what was the complaint? He says, where is now at least one person who could read Latin commentaries on the Holy Scriptures? Who among them studies the Gospels, prophets, and apostles? Alas, all Christian youths who stand out for their abilities know only the language and literature of the Arabs, read and zealously study Arabic books, spend huge sums of money to compile large libraries for themselves, and loudly proclaim what a surprise this literature deserves. These books do not deserve any attention, although Christians even forgot their language and food. There is one in 1,000 who can write a tolerable Latin letter to his friend. On the contrary, innumerable are those who can express themselves in Arabic with the utmost grace and write poetry in this language with great beauty and art. than the Arabs themselves. So that was the complaint of the medieval bishop. The next, please. The Europeans really actively studied the Arab-speaking thinkers both in the Middle Ages and in the Renaissance periods. It was during these periods that the Arab-speaking philosophy fulfilled, so to speak, its historical mission. In order not to be unfounded, we present the opinion of the leading specialist in the philosophy of the Renaissance period, well-known Russian professor Garfunkel. He states, since the inception of philosophical schools, otherwise free-thinking dominated them, formed under the influence of medieval Eastern thought and naturalistic interpretations of Aristotle. Of course, he meant the philosopher of the Italian Renaissance of the 16th century, Pomponazzi from Italy, is faithful to tradition, and it is easier to say professional duties. What does it mean? The leader of philosophy, the teacher of philosophy, had to interpret the works of Stagirite, that is Aristotle, attracting his most authoritative commentators, Avicenna, Ibn Sina, Averroes, Thomas Aquinas, and others. Next. These are not just and only the words. Indeed, it is not known how philosophy would have developed further, and through it all the sciences, including natural ones, if the Arabic-speaking philosophers of the 13th, of the 12th and 13th centuries, and especially of the 10th and 12th centuries, did not pick up the banner of the world science and technology, which fell under the onslaught of medieval theology, and did not carry him through this difficult period. Indeed, the year of 529 in the history of world civilization could have been the end of ancient culture, if not for the East thirsting for knowledge. It is thanks to the philosophers who came from Central Asia that ancient thought did not die out. Since the 9th century, the Arab-speaking enlighteners, our ancestors, became aware of the works of Aristotle, and through them, the whole of Europe became acquainted with the genius of philosophy. The next, please. Naturally, the continuity in the development of the philosophy of the East and West was expressed in different ways at different stages, historical stages, I mean. In the 9th, 13th centuries in the East, mainly in Central Asia, advanced Muslim thinkers, reviving Hellenic and Hellenistic philosophy, gave it their own interpretation, and in this form introduced it to the representatives of the Western world and philosophy. This is how the continuity between the philosophy of antiquity and the philosophy of the medieval East was carried out, on the one hand, and between the philosophical thought of the Arab-speaking cultural world and the philosophy of the West on the other. The next. It was the Arab-speaking philosophy in its time, shown period 9th, 12th centuries, that had a huge impact on the philosophy of Western Europe, thereby contributing to the a great kind of synthesis of these cultures. Speaking about this philosophy, we mean the results of the efforts of many peoples of Central Asian region, concretely Turks, Persians, Arabs, Syrians, Jews, Tajiks, each of whom created their own culture on the basis of their relative commonality of their historical destiny, so to say. Socio-economic, spiritual, political ways of development gave a powerful impetus to the philosophical, natural science, socio-political concepts between which there was a lot of in common. Thanks. Next. One of Arab-speaking philosophers of his time. So, starting from the 7th century, you know that Arab tribes were united, followed by their incredibly rapid expansion to the north of Africa and to the vast territories of Iran and at last Central Asia and Transcaucasia. In the West, Arab possessions stretched among the African coast of the Mediterranean Sea up to the Iberian Peninsula, the conquest of most of which was completed in the middle of the second decade of the 8th century. The consequence of this naturally should have been the most intensive communication between peoples, the interaction of their cultures, the establishment of successive ties between them in various spheres of creative activity. The next, please. The domination of the Arabs in Spain, mainly in the south part of Spain, which lasted almost 8 centuries, led to the flourishing of the Arab-speaking Muslim culture in the West, the development of, so to say, Arab-Spanish philosophy, the emergence of such major thinkers like Ibn Bajjah, died in 1138, who gave a materialistic interpretation of the philosophy of Aristotle. The next was Ibn Tufayl, who, under the strong influence of Neoplatonism, created a very interesting philosophical treatise called The Novel of Hayy, the son of IX-XII, and Ibn Rushd, at last, as if summing up the entire Arab-speaking philosophical culture and created the doctrine which became an important milestone in the history of general philosophy. The synthesis of the culture of the peoples who entered the territory of the Caliphate, especially Maurennachar and Iran, and its further development in Spain, became a milestone for the peoples of Europe and European civilization, especially for the states bordering on Spain. Consequently, they were the impetus for the formation and development of the cultures of the peoples of the West. The next. So one of medieval Arabic treatises, as you can see here, a very acute written Arabic, and if I'm not mistaken, some kind of trigonometric calculations maybe of scientists. You know that the medieval scientists, thinkers, or let us say enlighteners, they were encyclopedically educated, which means that they knew at least 6, 7 different kinds and levels of knowledge, natural sciences and humanitarian ones. So far, they were genius. The next, please. The culture of the Muslim East has influenced the culture of the West in various ways. The Caliphate communicated with the peoples of the West, first on military political, second trade economic, and last cultural ideological grounds. It is recognized that it took more than, pay attention please, 5 centuries for Europe to assimilate the achievements of philosophy, natural science, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, created in the 12th, 13th centuries on the territory from North Africa and Iberian Peninsula to the borders of China. Golenishev Kutuzov, a well-known Russian philosopher and historian, referring to the French scientist Guardi and his famous work, Arab Philosophy and Medieval Europe, written in Paris in 1847, writes, in Baghdad, at the court of the Abbasids, in Cordoba, the Umayyads, and Almoravids in 7th, 12th centuries, 4 centuries remarkable schools of scholars connected with mathematicians and thinkers of Muslim Central Asia was created and flourished there the next piece. Thus, there was only one line of cultural development from Samarkand or Central Asia to Toledo, Spain. The peripheral area of Greek Arab science, which passed with all the Arab libraries into the hands of Christians at the beginning of the so-called Reconquista. This is confirmed by the works of Watt Montgomery and Dieterichi, which contains rich material on the influence of Arabic-speaking philosophical thought in general on the spiritual life of medieval Europe in particular. Have we any more time? Have we? Do please, let us continue. Watt Montgomery testifies that in the 8th century, European scientists interested in science and philosophy realized how much they needed to learn from the Arabs, I mean the Arab-speaking scientists, and began to study the main Arabic works as well as translate the main ones into Latin, as well as all subsequent development of European philosophy is deeply indebted to Arab authors and Thomas Aquinas. Dieterichi notes that medieval Europe got acquainted with ancient Greek philosophy primarily through the Arab-speaking philosophy, thanks to the works of Farabi, Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, and others. It is knowledge that the intellectual movement, whose father is considered to be Ibn Rushd, the 12th century, influenced European thought before the advent of experimental science of Francis Bacon. According to the French scientist Guy, in Europe of the 12th, 13th centuries, after acquaintance with the translations of the works of scientists of the Muslim world, there is a need for the reapproachment with the East and its culture in general. So in the 12th and 13th centuries, just I'm coming to the conclusion, by decree of the Vienna Cathedral, the departments, pay attention please, the departments of Oriental languages were organized at the universities of Paris, France, Rome, Italy, Oxford, England, Bologna, Italy, Salamanca. Their purpose was to use the treatises of Eastern science. So, to sum up all spoken above, we can say that if there were no the teaching of the first Eastern Renaissance, the so-called Eastern peripatetic period of 9th and 12th centuries, it would be impossible to know the original works of great antiquity, and mostly of that of Aristotle. And Aristotle, as you know, was the instructor and teacher of Alexander the Great of Macedonia. Thank you very much.